right, everyone. Well, let's get started. Like I said, we're here today for the Meet the Author with our authors of Slicing Spaces, performance of architecture in cinema. We'll start today with just a little overview. Rebecca and Gul will tell us a little bit about the book, and then we'll open it up for questions. Slicing Spaces explores the interconnected relationship between architecture and film via distinct approaches to spaces of the city, confinement, actuality, the psyche, and the imagination. I've got the book here. I'm not sure if you can see it with my background. I'll put the link in the chat. And with that, I'll hand it over to you both to tell us a little bit more about the book.
Thank you, Tamsin. Gul, you're on mute, just so you know.
Okay, I was saying the same thing. Thank you so much for having us. We're delighted.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so do we want to start with a little bit of an overview of the book, or will we go straight into introductions, Gul, and then talk about the book?
I think we should talk a little bit about ourselves first, if some of the audience doesn't know us. My name is Dr. Gul Kacmaz Erk. I'm originally from Turkey, and both Rebecca and I are based in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, on the sunny Belfast day. Belfast is always amazing when it's sunny. I'm the head of architecture and planning departments in Queen's University Belfast. That's our university, both of us. And I'm a senior lecturer, which is in American terms, associate professor doctor here. And my specialty in the last 30 years, believe it or not, is cinema and architecture. I do research on other stuff as well, but particularly, I started in my master's, actually. My interest started then. And then it never stopped. So still, I'm doing many different things around this topic, but that is my main research. In my teaching, I do design studio, architectural design studio. I have actually a studio called CineArch, Cinematic Architecture, which I love so much. And I'm also the director of Applied Architecture and Design course, as well as a part-time funded course for people in practice with any background, any creative background, which is called Cinematic Architecture. I'm sure I'm forgetting many things, but doesn't matter. I also teach humanities dissertation, history and theory of architecture in our undergrad program. And many other things, and I work with lovely PhDs as well. Over to you, Rebecca.
I really should have gone first, Gul, because how am I supposed to follow that?
I was thinking, you have done so much in your 20s. I can't even believe how you met. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Rebecca Jane McConnell. That's a sort of recent-ish title. I finished my PhD in 2023. By trade, by practice, I am an architect, an ARB registered architect, but I am now a researcher at Queen's with a focus on film, and I'm very much so into visual provocations, which I guess comes through in this book because I created a lot of the illustrations on the chapter titles. All of the sort of purple images that you'll see throughout, that was from me. I also contributed a chapter on Hitchcockian space and psychological architecture for this book. And that's how Gul and I sort of met. She taught me in both my undergraduate, but in my master's, she took me for my dissertation course. And I developed this idea of Alfred Hitchcock and all about sort of how he used architecture as a character in his films, which is how we sort of, I guess, bonded about our love of cinema and architecture, and then went on a few years later to create this book. And sort of in my outside of traditional architecture, I also have a bit of a sort of presence online. Myself and my work partner, Cathal Crumley, also an architect, we have a page called The Future Blueprint. We operate on like all the socials, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all the rest. So yeah, so I guess that's that's about me. My interest is about climate change. I'm very interested in finding out how sort of visually we can, as architects, imagine space in futures and far futures as well. Okay.
Perfect.
So this is the images that I was speaking about. There were 17 chapters, 17 contributors, all named here. And we named the book Slicing Spaces, Performance of Architecture in Cinema, because it's just that. It's about how architecture performs as a character, as a sort of an extra person, and sort of emotes through space whenever it comes to cinema and film. Whenever I'm talking about these images, you can notice that the style differs throughout. I experimented quite a bit with different ways of creating images. It was at a time where AI imagery was coming out. So for a couple of the images, I created a drawing and put it into AI to see what would come out and see if it sort of matched what we were trying to go with. A lot of the time it did not. But that was something that I experimented with as well. But a lot of the time, programs that I used were Procreate, Photoshop, and there's even a bit of AutoCAD in there as well for some of the scale drawings.
Old habits.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe before that, if you go back, Rebecca, one more, because I really like this image. We created this image just for this talk. We were like 17 fantastic illustrations by Rebecca, and we have the cover that is from Common Ground. 18, good number for a good slide, and it worked out really well. Well, thanks to Rebecca who put it together. And these are all her images. But there is a lot of work, as you can imagine, behind what you're seeing on your screen. All these people were dissertation students in Queen's architecture. I shouldn't say all, maybe 2/3. And then one day, a good friend of mine, Jan, from University of Liverpool in the south in Ireland, he messaged me, he emailed me, and he said, I have a few really good undergraduate dissertations about cinema and architecture. They are publication quality. Where should we send them? And we were working on this with Rebecca, and I said, send them to me. We may, if they're good enough, we may include them in the book. So I think in the end, 2 of them are from Limerick. Not even master's, undergrad dissertations turned into book chapters. And then a few of them are, I think, are PhD students. I'm quickly checking the names. So Ece is there. And do we have Kalina somewhere?
Yes, she's
Kalina.
up here.
That
I
one,
don't
yeah.
know if you can see mine.
Those were at the time my PhD students working on cinema and architecture. Kalina finished, sorry, a few years ago. She's in Sligo, a lecturer, and Ece just submitted her PhD on Belfast film locations recently. So those are linked to their work in their PhD. And I have a chapter on Dark City, almost like an architectural film analysis. And so it started that way. We did these maybe 5, 6 years of dissertation groups, and maybe about 5 students each year. Took my theme. We have maybe 6 to 8 themes within architecture, depending on student numbers, and students pick their team and the supervisor, and they work with us. And then they write a dissertation of about 10,000 words. Usually, because they're architects, they're quite visual. And cinema and architecture was quite popular, and we always worked together as a group. So what happened is, within the group, everyone influenced their work, each other's work, because they gave feedback to each other. Actually, at least one student was reading another student's draft every month. So after that, because the quality is quite high with the dissertations, I had this weird moment where, oh, this should be a book. They're so good. But that came a bit later, hasn't it, Rebecca? You were actually a master's student when you wrote your dissertation. And when we decided to do the book, you were already a PhD student. Do I remember correctly?
I think so. I think we sort of talked about it, but didn't seriously decide to do it until around the 2020 mark.
Yeah, that was my sabbatical, and there was the pandemic. So a lot of time to think and produce good work, I think, for most people, if they didn't have, little people in their homes.
Mhm.
Yeah, Rebecca actually, and Blaine over there, and is Danny here? Danny is one.
Mhm.
A few of them, yeah,
Mhm.
Danny Sewich there, yeah. The three of them got an award, the Best Dissertation Award, over different years, and they are in the book. So these are not all of the dissertations. These were the ones who we managed to collide in a book format, because some of those people were already graduates and architects, and they were in different countries. Some of them wanted to be part of this, some not so much. Sometimes we emailed them and they're like, oh, I'm back to France. I have a baby. Here is the picture kind of contribution, which was lovely. That was Andre somewhere there. And he did message us yesterday and send best wishes to Belfast as well. My point is, this was a revisit to the dissertations, and everybody had to condense their dissertations, change that as to the theme of the book, change into a book chapter format, which is usually around 6,000 words. And we wanted to include the amazing visuals students had as the new authors, because usually they're not just film stills or Rebecca's lovely images. Students do a lot of drawings in these dissertations. Say, there's old boy here. I don't know, I can manage to make this work. Maybe not. Some images from Old Boy, and then a drawing of the plan of the prison cell in Old Boy. Lovely Korean film I would recommend. So there's a lot so we worked with Common Ground, I guess, partly because they're open to innovative projects, which we think this one is, turning something hidden within the confines of academia and become a public book that's open to everyone. They were quite open with the idea, but also they embraced our idea of keeping a lot of images in the book in color, and even including more images, the ones you see here on the screen, to the beginning of each chapter. So that's how it started. So it's a very complex scenario where it takes years to produce these works, and then the review process, once you submit, the review process with the publisher takes usually more than a year, usually 2 years as well. It's reviewed, you get feedback, it's typeset, you check everything a few times. So we gave feedback to the authors, now contributors, authors, not students anymore. And then we got feedback from reviewers as well, if I remember correctly. That's where we are. But I think we'll step back for a second and go to your next slide, Rebecca, and talk about architecture and cinema. I put in just a minute before this call, I put into ChatGPT what's the relationship between architecture and cinema, and the reply was quite obvious, not so interesting. So I'm not going to go into that. I'll do my own thing because I think I probably know at this point at least a bit more than ChatGPT about the topic. When I started doing my own master's dissertation, which also became a book actually, maybe that inspired me. Now I'm thinking to make this book. I was telling people that I study fiction films. I look at the spaces in films, and I look at the buildings and the cities, and that's my interest. I immediately got the reaction, but what's the relationship between cinema and architecture? Is there a relationship? Even architects and film people asked me that question, which was quite frustrating. So part of the dissertation at the time became that. It became what the relationship is, because I was almost trying to prove everyone that they're so linked. Because I was doing that in 90s, and basically this area of research start in the 90s, mainly with Professor Francois Pans from Cambridge, and Maren Thomas, who worked with them, who is a filmmaker from, I think from Sweden. She's from a Scandinavian country. They experimented a lot with actually a master's course similar to ours now. They also wrote the first books. And then architectural design, the famous magazine at the time, did a session, did a special issue on, it's called Architecture Plus Film. If I remember it, it's from 2000 or a bit earlier. Those were like, and there was a few more articles and books that I could put my hands on, and those were the only publications that I could specifically find on the topic. And then it exploded a lot in 2000s, 2010s, and 20s, especially in 20s, with technology, with social media, with the easiness of having your phone in your hand and then making videos anytime, anywhere. And architects also started to make films. I remember that my students at Delft, this would be 2005. What is that, 20 years ago? My students there started to make films, but then for them to make a film, they had to find these big cameras, at least home cameras, which are way bigger than a mobile phone that we put in our pockets or in our bags on a daily basis. And that was a new thing in architecture. Obviously, it's not anymore, which I'm delighted about. When I literally forced undergrad students to make a film in second year as part of their history theory class. Usually that was their very first film ever. And imagine these are people usually at the age of 20. But now I'm pretty sure that's quite common. So I would say and I'll ask Rebecca's definition as well, but one definition that I always used, which I don't think is enough anymore, but I'll say it anyways. Film space is is a representation of architectural space. That's how I was convincing people. Film space, if we study film space, spaces in films, spaces in documentaries, fiction films, animation, shorts, anything, if we study those films, those are representations of architecture, of buildings, of cities, of spaces, just like a drawing, just like a model, just like beautiful renderings we do. And the advantage of film to other modes of representation that we do is that it has the fourth dimension. It has a dimension of time. So it's a way better tool, or more interesting tool, I will say, to capture lived space, to capture how life happens in the spaces architects create. So that's one definition. But the area of architecture and cinema grew in time, especially with virtual reality, AI, augmented reality, anything, you name it. And also what we are doing right now, Zoom space. One of the films I studied in my PhD, which was on science fiction cinema, was Thomas in Love, a Belgian film from 2000. And at the time, imagine, just 25 years ago, there wasn't even Skype. Skype just happened maybe a year later, which means that all of the things we're so used to now, or if you're younger than 25, everything you have had all the time in your life did not happen in architecture for centuries and centuries. Even photography is quite new. So this virtual space becomes quite embedded into our lives. So another definition about the relationship between cinema and architecture could be how the real space that I'm in right now, which you don't see, which is actually my bedroom. And the virtual space I created with the background, with the Zoom space you're seeing here, and with your own space wherever you are, those intersections of the real, my real, your real, and the intersection where the virtual is, which is this interface of my laptop screen. That is architecturally super interesting, and cinema comes in and becomes part of that at that level as well. Something we started recently to work more on is film locations. And how studying where films are made in the city, we have done with EDGE Belfast, and with Alice now we are doing Dublin. And at the end, we want to map GIS mapping all of Ireland at some point. That's the dream. By looking at film locations and how the real situation is, how it was when it was filmed at the time, and how the director interpreted a real urban space and made it a film space. That's another dimension of architecture. And finally, maybe we can say, once we start a bit more to go into the, I'll call it game space, because in games this happens a lot with a headset or not. In normal games or serious games, you start to be a digital person with your avatar and start to explore spaces. That's a new part of cinema and architecture that I'm exploring, which would be, we're working on a virtual museum project where we are designing a virtual peace museum for Northern Ireland, but it is completely virtual. There's no, it's not an extension of a real museum. It's a museum that grows from room to room as we collect content about the troubles here in Northern Ireland. So there's many different ways. And Rebecca's approach in her article, in her chapter, was totally different as well, where she wrote in psychology. So I'll talk too much. Over to you, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, I guess on the next slide, what is this book really about? So it's, again, as I said, moving past this idea of architecture as background in cinema and thinking about it as an actual thing with agency. So it has a performance, it carries emotion, and it has influence on the person watching the film. This is the thing that really got me interested in the book, and then it's something that I carry through sort of with my chapter again. So as I said, Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, he sort of tried to play with the people viewing his films, which I thought was really fun and playful, because architecture does that in a lot of ways. It sort of forces the hand of the person visiting the building, like you're sashaying people through corridors and doors and trying to guide them through and have this experience. And that's something that can be manipulated with architecture in cinema as well. So as I said, it's this performance, and that link between how you're psychologically responding to what you see and how we as creators and architects and shapers of the built environment, how we sort of have the hand as almost the puppet master. Again, I'm making us sound like master manipulators. I just more mean trying to have this positive experience in building and viewing of things. I think is a really special thing. I don't know how many architects are here, but that's something that really interests me. We've already talked a little bit about there were 17 contributors, but we split up this book into 5 different categories. So the first one was a lot about confinement. And the chapter contributors here talk quite a lot about like corridors and sort of spaces, smaller spaces. Psyche, which was where my chapter sat. And again, it was all about this sort of messing with the psyche and the response of the viewer. The city, which is where Gul's chapter sat. It was very much so about how the city acts and performs as this character, and how the film wouldn't be the same without that specific setting. imagination, and then actuality as well. So those two sort of play with each other in that they're very different. So one's all about this, what's going on in your mind versus reality and actuality. As we said, this book was edited during lockdowns and shaped by both academic inquiry and cultural introspection. So the pandemic almost, I feel like in a lot of ways, the book wouldn't have happened without the pandemic, because there were lockdowns, meaning that you were sort of sitting at a desk and you got to put your blinders on and actually work on it. Whereas the sort of messiness of everyday life wasn't getting at you, the outside world, and you could sort of sit and concentrate on the outputs. Architecture as emotional agent, just going into that a little bit more about what I was speaking of. There was scenes from many films, but one in particular, which is the sort of cover art, which is this one here. It's from Rear Window, where Jeff is sort of stuck in his apartment. He's broken his leg, and he can only see this sort of elevation that was built. That's a set, by the way, it's not real. And I just thought it was really interesting, this idea of he was the voyeur and he's witnessing all these different things happening with his neighbors, and there's almost murder mysteries going on as well. And how that sort of space frames and distorts his behavior and then other people's behavior when they realize that he is watching them. Perception and memory as well are very important when it comes to the psyche. Perception, I also reference quite a bit the film Psycho, and sort of Marion, how she, whenever she visits Bates Motel, her perception of place is very different from what's actually happening. She feels like she's sort of hiding in a safe space, when in actuality she's in a very dangerous space. And then memory as well. So we talk a lot about how this book approaches architecture as a silent actor and this emotional mirror. Curating the book, I don't know if you have any, we're trying to think back of sort of the process and stories from the process. And as you can imagine, 17 contributors to a book, it was all done digitally. So there were no real meetings held. It was kind of pre-Microsoft Teams, before all that kind of took off and everyone was using Zoom and Microsoft Teams, which is hard to believe because now we can't live without it 5 years on. But we only ever communicated through email, which is interesting for me because even though Gul knows all of the contributors, there are still some that to this day, if they walk past me in the street, I wouldn't know who they are. So we're very much at this digital relationship, and trying to get responses a lot of the time was like herding cats, to be perfectly honest. But we got there in the end. I'm trying to think, you had a funny story, Gul, about Danny, I think.
What was it? Blaine?
Oh, was it Blaine? Yeah, Blaine.
Blaine was not responding. I think he was abroad. I think he was in America, if I'm not wrong, at the time. And we were like, oh, his chapter is so good. It was about Tarkovsky's Solaris. We really wanted to. We had actually published it. Actually, I tested this idea of this book with Blaine because he was in the very first group when I started in Queens, probably in 2011 or 12. And then his paper got the best writing award in the school. And then I said to him, let's present this in a conference. We presented it in Liverpool, and then he published it. So I knew that this could have been done, and I had published my own dissertation as a book as well. But we wanted to include that in this book, and then Blaine wasn't responding. And I think it could be even like we edited part of it or something. We shortened it, or
Yeah,
was
I
it
think,
short
yeah.
already?
At the start, he was sort of very keen, and then he just ghosted us. Um, and then we sort of just went ahead and did what we thought was right. And then in the end, we sort of got in touch with them and stuff. But it was one of those things where you're carrying on, hoping and like that everything was going to turn out. There were a few people that were annoyed at me because the deadline that I gave was the actual deadline, and there was no extension on that. So that's point for me to remember that we need like a fake deadline to give people and then a real deadline. But it was a real learning curve, and especially even whenever you're an architect going out and sort of delivering projects and managing a design team and trying to sort of get all your ducks in a row as such. It was a real learning experience for me because I was sort of project managing all these people and then could bring that learning into practice. And communication is key, as everybody always says. And also the contributors, they were all finalized dissertations, as Gul said, mostly from Queen's Masters of Architecture. And you can see all of that work on Instagram. I have it, the handle there at the top, qub.arch. You can check that out because I know it's a very active Instagram and it shows a lot of great sort of visual works. So
We
yeah.
can maybe also say a few things about, well, I would say to both young people in the room, because we can't see you, I can't know who is here, but also academics. Trust yourself, but also for the academics to trust younger people. It was a bet for me to approach Rebecca while she was doing her PhD, because I only knew her as a good student, that's it. But I trusted that she would be brilliant at editing this book, and she was. I actually started another similar project because I had another dissertation group about refugee studies, architecture, forced migration, forced displacement, etc. And then that one didn't work out in the end, mainly because, it was after the pandemic, so I didn't have enough time, and the student I picked didn't have. She moved on, let's say. She was working as a practicing architect in London. She was very busy, etc. We may go back to that project, who knows? But just trust young people, and you may be surprised. If it wasn't Rebecca, just me editing the book, I think visually it would be less interesting. Because the stuff like what you're seeing on the screen, the purple images were all Rebecca's ideas to contribute to the book, because she's so used to producing those as an architecture student in the past, and for her PhD as well. And the selection of the publisher is very important, I think. We usually try to go with the most famous, the most well-known publishers. And my experience with many different publishers now, to be honest, and I'm not saying this because Tameson is here, the best relationship has been with Common Ground, because they are yes people. They try to make things happen, but also they come with ideas. Last year, the book is published, the hard copy, the one I have here, is published in 2003, and the paperback is coming out, the one behind us with the new cover, coming out now. And last year they said, oh, we need reviewers, let's review this book, let's take this to one of our conferences. And they recommended me to go to South Korea, to Seoul, to the conference, and launch the book there, which I did, and which was a great experience. And I gave the hard copy book in my hand to someone from the States who studied things like AI, VR, an academic, and he wrote a lovely book review for us. That idea came from Common Ground, and then the idea about today came from Common Ground as well. And sometimes I think it's important that the publisher makes the process easy for you. That's important. But also they're good at marketing. I think that's very important. I had poorer relationships with some of the other publishers I worked with. So once that happens, you don't want to work with those people anymore. But this, because of my ambition, Rebecca's ambition, and Common Ground's ambition about the book, it's also shortlisted for one of their book awards. I think the book is what it is today. It would be cut down. It would be a smaller book. Another publisher would say 17 chapters is too many images. We can't do color, stuff like that happens all the time. That's one thing. Do we have other slides, Rebecca? Let's remember.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess this was about my idea that visual storytelling is so important. So as Gul referenced to, like, even my my master's work and my PhD work, it was very much so visually represented. I sort of had this idea of illustrating each chapter cover to sort of allow the reader to feel what the chapter was about before even turning the page and reading any words. That's what I like to do, and that's what I believe film does as well. So this is the 2D sort of flatter version of that. As I said before, it was a mishmash of many ways of representing. So it was traditional sketching, digital tools. I sort of layered, tried to use symbolism. So there's something referenced from a film in that chapter throughout. I also experimented with AI. This was in 2021 or 2022, so it was nowhere near what it is today. You couldn't just say, draw me a such and such, and it would come out perfect. It was very ugly back then. And I sort of
Prompting
yeah.
wasn't a verb to prompt.
Yeah, exactly. So it was always workshopped by me. And the goal, as I said, was to make each chapter feel cinematic before the reader even starts the first sentence. I was going to talk a little bit about sort of what we included, but I guess we've already spoke about that, so we can go on to what we left behind. So I guess this is sort of, Gul and I had this conversation recently, and it wasn't just sort of the films that we left out as something that could have been included, like films like Inception that would fit in quite nicely to what we brought to the table. It's also things like gaming spaces, architectural styles, the importance of brutalism in films. And also, I think we also referenced there, Gul, as well in the next slide, but we'll talk about it now. AI, the metaverse, sort of the future of film. What is it? People aren't going to the cinema anymore. People aren't like using VR and AR, and there's so many different things and topics that didn't make it in these conversations and slicing spaces that we love to explore now. And I think it's a testament to sort of how quickly digital space is changing and the built environment is changing. I guess unless there's anything you want to say there, Gul, I was going to move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's move on. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I would hear people's ideas if they would like to share
I would
with.
love to hear that. Like I think there's a chat box there, right?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. I can see one from, is it Keisha?
Okay.
Keisha, would you like to unmute yourself to ask your question? You might be able to perhaps articulate it a little bit better than me reading it. If you'd prefer not, I'm happy to read it. But it's the first question in the chat there.
Guess I'll go back to this.
Well, we are waiting. Philip was with us for the whole thing, but he has to leave. Philip, if you're still
Hi,
here,
hello.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
let's
let's start with him, if that's okay.
Keisha, would you like to articulate your question? You might be able to do it a little bit better than me.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear us? No, I think there's some trouble there. So there's two questions in the chat. So what I might do is just read them out. So I'll make it a little bit bigger so I can read it without my glasses. Hi, my name is Keisha. I'm a master's student in South Africa, and I'm deeply interested in the intersection between film and architecture. It's incredibly comforting to know that there are many others that share the same interest. The current working title for my research is Cinematic Space and Cinematic Framing as an Informant for Architectural Design, which is right up your alley there. The question that I have is, how valid do you feel my research is in terms of exploring these two cinematic elements? Do you think that the key principles of either one will lead to something conclusive? The reason behind the research is that I'm trying to unpack the very basic element of film, which is the frame and the space within. And then I hope that question makes sense. I'll pass it over to you both.
Do you want to say something, Rebecca? Because I can talk for about this. So why don't you go first?
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of the question, how relevant is it or how valid is it? I would say
Totally.
extremely valid, especially in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. The space of architecture and architectural design, how we experience space is going to completely mesh with digital space. And I think that a lot of the time now, I have a friend, a close friend, Cahill, who I run the Future Blueprint with. He solely works now in architectural visualization, and clients are no longer asking for 2D renders, they're asking for 3D animation. And that is because as a client who is usually not an architect, usually can't imagine space from drawings, imagining it through 3D visualizations and representations in like that film area, it's so much easier. It makes so much more sense to imagine a space in that way. So I think it's going to be really relevant and only grow like in a tighter way with the architecture in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So that's all I was going to say on it.
Great. And to add on to that, framing is a key element in. It's a bit like Kia. Can you tell us what your background is? Did you study architecture or film or something similar?
Hi, I hope you can hear me this time. Eh? I've managed to sort out my mic. Hi, so
Yeah.
I studied architecture, did my undergrad, just finished my postgrad in honors, but now I'm pursuing my master's as well, on a part-time basis, mainly because I want to have all the time in the world, about a year, to fully delve into the space of researching this, intersection between film and architecture. So yes, I'm a previous architecture student that, as I said, is now pursuing a master's.
Framing is very relevant. I'm in love with South Africa, by the way, because I did a book. I went to a conference there and did a book chapter with a professor in Johannesburg, and then I'm editing a different book with two colleagues in Cape Town. So I may know some of your tutors, professors. Framing is a bit like window in a building. It links the inside and the outside, and they usually call what is in the frame in film studies is on-screen space, and what is outside of the frame is off-screen space. So say if I'm sitting here and I don't have a cat, but if I had a cat and you heard the cat as I spoke, it may be like me, I am in the within the frame on screen space, and the cat is in off screen space. Because of the sound, you would know that there would be another person or animal, outside of the frame. So that is very relevant. And I understand that you are going to the basics. That's what I did with my master's, which you might want to have a look. It's a tiny little book called Architecture in Cinema. A relation of representation based on space. But there are many other people who talk about framing. Richard Koch from University of Liverpool talks about how the frame comes closer and closer towards us. Like it was the big cinema screen first, and then it became our television, a bit closer, and then the laptop screen closer, and then our phone closer, and now it's going to go into our, it has gone for some people into our glasses. So the frame, the screen coming closer and closer, but that's not me, that's Richard. So there are other people talking about this. It's very, very relevant and very interesting. Isn't that what we do in architecture as well, to define a space, maybe not in 2D, more in 3D, three-dimensional Euclidean space, but we define those surfaces and spaces to get to avoid having a new meaning architecturally, architectonically. So it is very, very relevant. I put my email in the chat if you want to contact me about some resources.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your talk, and I will definitely be trying to get a hold of the book as well. And I most definitely will be trying to contact you as well, because it's just such a vast topic, and it's easy to kind of get lost as well. So I appreciate all the guidance that I can get. Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
I'm
We have
putting my Instagram,
Oh,
an
fantastic.
Instagram handle in the chat, because that's definitely the easiest way to get me anyway.
Now, Philip says, sorry, I need to leave, but there's a question. How might the concept of architecture as an active character in cinema inform real-world design strategies, particularly in creating built environments that intentionally shape users' emotional and social experiences? So I don't know if you want to pick up on that there.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. You go first, Rebecca, because you're interested in emotions and psychology a lot.
Yeah, I think how does it filter over into the real world? Gul and I had a conversation recently about the sensory experience that an architect gives you in their design, and imagining sort of the walls, the sort of smells that you smell, the touching of the walls, the textures, even like the sound in the air. Like, do you hear echoes? Do you hear nothing? It's a sensory experience, and it is an active character whenever you're experiencing architecture, buildings, space, even in a city, walking down a city like street. I think that they were always linked, but it's only more in now that you're sort of seeing that strong link between digital space and sort of real life space, that you're starting to notice it a lot more. It's bringing all these topics to the surface. As an active character in cinema, your question is sort of that intentionally shape users' emotional and social experiences. Well, that's exactly it to me. It's a sensory thing. I was talking to Gul about this. I always go through the 5 senses when I'm creating architecture or a design, and imagine how it will be for the user experiencing that space. And it can be any user, but imagining even the sort of hand soap in the toilets, like the branding of space. I hate the word branding, but that's sort of how I think about it.
I guess just to add on to that, I think this is a very complex question, and I'll approach from 2 directions. One is when cinema started in 1895, the modern city was evolving as well. The industrial city from 19th century towards 20th century, and the modern city and cinema grew together. And we as researchers in this area, we argue that almost everyone, I guess, film and cinema and looking at our cities through the lens of the camera, through the vision of the filmmakers, has changed the way we perceived and we designed our buildings and cities. In that sense, cinema did become an active character, almost like an influencer over the way we design, we create the built environment. That's one way of looking at it. But also, I guess at the beginning, 30 years ago, why I felt like I had to study films, and I mentioned lived space a little bit. Palasma popularized that earlier term. a lot through phenomenology and his writing. Another scholar I respect a lot. Or you can see it in Atmospheres, which is Zumthor's little book, Eyes of the Skin by Plasma. So all the importance of all the senses. Yes, we can say film only adds sound to what we do visually as architects through drawings and models. But it's not just that. You can if you're watching a World War II film, for instance, you can almost smell the smoke of the bombing that's happening on the field. Things like film almost gives all the senses to you as you watch it, not just the visuals and the sound, because it really manipulates the way we look at something. It's really active in that sense. That always fascinated me as an architecture student, because the plan sections and elevations, and now they are way better. But at the time when I was studying under quite a modernist education, were quite sterile. They were quite simple. There weren't any people in them. There wasn't any life in them. I think that frustrated me. And when I watched some Jacques Tati films, mainly My Uncle and Playtime, I was fascinated how architecture became an active character in film, and how it became, the film became a tool to literally get that emotional aspect of designing and creating spaces. That's why I think that's a very relevant question, and I think there's a lot that can be done in that area of research still, in link to game spaces, but also in link to virtual reality that Rebecca was talking about. When a client puts on a headset or even just looks at a screen where they go into the space that the architect is designing for them, that's totally different than the architect bringing a plan and saying, this is the best museum in the world. That is not the same for a client compared to actually walking around. To be honest, we do this sometimes in studio, and the first time we turned students' designs into virtual reality and put on the headsets and walked around it, one of the projects which I really liked, and I worked with the student for 3 months on the project. When I actually experienced the same design, the same building, although I'm an architect, I can read drawings really well, etc. It was a totally different experience to be in the space compared to just looking at its drawings. So I think we are any profession but architecture, particularly and urbanism, urban design, are being shaped by the possibilities of cinema. And I'll include game design and virtual reality today to that.
We probably have time for one more question, if anyone wants to put one in the chat. I do have one question as well, that I might just ask you now while I'm here, since we have a moment. At what point does architecture become a character in a film, right? So you've named some great films, but I'm also thinking of some bad films where maybe this is not a consideration. Maybe there's, it hasn't been thought through in such a way. At what point is architecture the character in, or is it always the character?
I would say my opinion, and let's hear Rebecca's. I think there is architecture in every film, and good directors use it well, like Wes Anderson, that we have seen with Grand Budapest Hotel, Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick. Oh gosh, I should remember all the big names now. Ridley Scott. Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, more from this side of the world, maybe Peter Greenaway. Wim Wenders is someone I study, and from the north, what's his name? The Swedish one. Oh gosh, it will come back to me. Fellini, Antonioni from Italy, Almodovar from Spain. I mean, there's many of them. But normally, the space is just there as a backdrop in many films, Jameson. So you're right. It's there, but it's not used as a character cleverly by everyone. Would you agree, Rebecca? What do you think?
I think that the word cleverly is very important there because I feel like it is always there as a character. Everybody is aware of the setting that the people are in this film, whatever it might be, or this TV show. But if it doesn't match if it doesn't do what it's supposed to be doing and it isn't considered, that's what potentially makes it not work. So it is always a character. It's just sometimes cast incorrectly. That's how I would put
Great
it.
way of putting it. I just have one more thing that is just a side note that if you wanted to sort of think about constructed spaces, digital spaces, material and immaterial, you have to go and see the Minecraft movie. And now it's a junky thing, right? Like it's a, kids movie, but it's really taking a built digital space where kids go into the game and build the space themselves, sort of taking that out and putting it in this other sort of an immaterial space in the sense that it's cinema, but it's also constructed in film. It's a really interesting play on architecture, gaming, material, immaterial, and it's a bit of fun too.
Yeah, no, I've heard that, and I saw a lot of advertising surrounding Minecraft this time. And I was tempted to go and see it. So maybe I will. Maybe I'll bring my 1-year-old daughter, even though she doesn't understand it.
Yeah. So Ross has just said, I'd also suggest the fun and goofy film Dave Made a Maze, which
Okay.
is perhaps also the same type of idea with sort of gaming and space and architecture there as well.
Great.
With that, I'd like to say thank you to both of you for your time today, and thank you to everyone for coming along. We've recorded the session, so we're going to go ahead and put it up online for people who might not be in the right time zone. But thank you. I put the link to the book in the chat. I'll add it again just before we all log out, but you can grab that online and read a little bit more in detail. Slicing spaces.
Well, I guess before we go, I really would like to thank you, Jameson and Common Ground, for being such good supporters of our work. Much appreciated.
Well, we're really
Yes,
trying
thank
to
you.
promote interdisciplinary research, and I feel like this is really at the heart of that. So it's a perfect example for us of the projects that we like to work on.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice morning, afternoon, evening. I never know.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
pop
thanks,
time
guys.
here.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
pop time. Well, it's still morning coffee time here. I'm going to go and have a good day.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.